when you start working at that type of a strategic level, you really need to be focused on the business. You really need to understand how your security program fits the business, how it supports, operations, and I think a lot of that is you do morph and become more of a business executive that is doing technology and managing risk and doing cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberOXtales, the podcast where cybersecurity scenarios meet reality. In each episode, we'll sit together with the top cyber pros to dissect major security incidents, giving you actionable insights and practical advice to fuel your playbooks and success. Ready? Let's go.
Hi, I'm Neatsun Ziv. I will be your host today at CyberOXtales, and today with me I've got Gary. Gary, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you. So my name is Gary Hayslip. I'm the current CISO at SoftBank Investment Advisors, or the Vision Fund. I've been in cyber and in IT for about 20 plus years, working with different companies, and really happy to be here.
So, thank you for taking the time and being with us. And today we're going to talk about building a risk narrative. But before we go into that, one of the sentences that you told me a few good years ago when we met was, I'm not a security executive. I'm a business executive that does security. What's behind that statement?
Well, I mean, I think all of us CISOs are, are security executives. It's just, I think what's happened is, and the way I kind of look at it is, the role itself has matured, and the longer you do it, like I'm in my fifth role as a CISO now, the more you move and work with executive teams, the more you work with boards. And when you start working at that type of a strategic level, you really need to be focused on the business. You really need to understand how your security program fits the business, how it supports, operations. And I think a lot of that is you do morph and become more of a business executive that is doing technology and managing risk and doing cybersecurity. And it's taken a mindset of going straight technical to being more strategic and business focused with a technical aspect.
So I think that part of being an executive in a company is actually being able to tell a very clear and crisp narrative that everything that you do ties into. And one of the things that I really liked and enjoyed in our conversation is making sure that you've got one very coherent narrative of risk and everything ties back to it. So tell us your high level strategy and we'll go deeper into that one.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of a systems thinker. So when I break things down, I'm looking at how everything's interrelated, how they're all kind of connected. And so for me, it's usually I go ahead and I start with like a risk/threat matrix where I'm understanding the threats to the organization. We're kind of identifying them. We're identifying the controls that we have in place to go ahead and manage them, and then understanding the residual risks and stuff that we have left over. And then I take that and I add, to that my, annually I'm doing like a NIST CSF. I use NIST, but I've used ISO or other frameworks as well. But I'm always doing some type of a continuous assessment of current controls, technologies, different things that we have installed within the security program, and risks that we've accepted because of the business. And because of operations, and bringing both of these together, it kind of gives me a picture or a story to tell of, these are the controls we have in place, the technologies and services that we're currently using to manage, these controls and to manage the risks that we've identified. And with that, this is our baseline. This is where I believe we are at. And then typically when I talk with the executive team, it's telling that story of, this is where I think we are at from a maturity standpoint. This is the focus that we need to work on for the next 6 to 12 months, and it's a constant discussion of, this is continuous. I've had multiple people tell me that, that cyber is it's just a cost center. The business just does it because they have to do compliance. I kind of hold I kind of, raised the BS flag on that because for me, businesses aren't doing it just because of compliance. Businesses are doing cyber because they're connected to the internet. Businesses are doing cyber because the way business is done today globally, connected to this massive network of networks per se, there is so much badness involved with that. There's so many attacks that are happening. There's so many, things that are, and many of these attacks have massive impact on organizations that, and in business operations that cyber isn't something that like a tax that you have to do. Cyber to me is something that you should be doing because it makes sense, And my job as the CISO is to lay out the threats, the controls, the current risks, and what we need to do to get better.
Okay, so now that you've established that security is something that you should be doing versus forced to be doing, you still need to take this and say, hey, I need to build a narrative. Do you think that the narrative between different companies is identical, similar, or it needs to be tailor-made for each one of the companies in a completely tailored way that fits that organization in that position in that time?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's different for each company. And a lot of it is because if you are regulated, your risk appetite is going to be very small. If you are say a product company, you're going to be concerned more about, especially if you're selling something online. Like when I used to work at Webroot, when I was the CISO at Webroot, we had a portal where we would sell software and everything else to customers. They would log in to buy antivirus or whatever. And one of the first things I thought of, when I got there was how much do we make an hour? And I was, asking the CFO, okay, we got this online portal, customers are buying, stuff from us, they're buying our products, how much do we make an hour? And they were, and then they finally come back and they were like, okay, we're making about $300,000 an hour. And I said, okay, so we can afford to be down for how long then? you know and that was the one thing I started telling my staff. I said, okay, think about it now. When we're going to go ahead and buy a particular technology to reduce our threats and manage our risk, $300,000 an hour is a baseline. How much of that are they willing to go ahead and lose? And what we found was they didn't want to lose $300,000 an hour. So, so if you go ahead and you tell them, hey, I want to buy a specific technology to guarantee, better uptime and to guarantee that that portal is protected, and it costs 150K, annually. Are they willing to pay 150K annually to make sure that they're collecting $300,000 an hour? You can have that value discussion because it makes sense. You've
That is
identified the
valid.
risk, you've identified, what it's going to cost us, and now you can go ahead and lay it out. Some CISOs don't do that homework, and you've got to be able to tell that value. And so, like here at SoftBank, we don't sell a product, but we invest, and we're regulated. And because we're regulated, you really have to understand, your regulators and the controls that are in place and what they look for. And then that will drive the controls you put in place, the security team that you build, the assessments that you do, and what you report to the board. Because they want to make sure that we are within compliance and that, there's very minimal room for risk. Each company is going to be different depending on, you know, what they're doing, what they're selling, what their operations are, who their partners are.
So you're saying, okay, start from the top, saying what is important to you, why you're in business,
Hmm.
what fuels your growth, what are you afraid of, build a story, and everything needs to be derived from that single story about how do you support the bottom line of that business. That is the basics of being an executive.
Yeah, and not only do you know that story, even then, before you go, like say, before you go to the board, I would go ahead and talk to people who've been to the board, ahead of time, and try to meet up with them, give them, my briefing, my story, what I'm going to lay out to the board, to get input from them to tailor it even more. And the reason you do it is so that way when you speak to them, there's some contextual value. They understand it and they can see why it's being brought to them and how they're going to use it.
Okay, so in order to get to a very crisp and short story that people can
Hmm.
follow, it is a lot of work. So you need to think about it. You need to constantly be aware of what's going on in the industry, what your peers are doing, constantly consult and have a massive network of people that you can always share and get information from. How do you spend and prioritize the time to actually get to that point? That is something that I see
Yeah.
most people struggle,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then they find it hard to communicate the risk because they don't have the tools.
And you bring up a point. I mean, there's times where you're the board where they will actually, hey, I just saw such and such article in the Wall Street Journal on this. Is this a threat to us? Or so you have to be aware of, in our community, you have to be aware of the latest threats and the latest things that are happening because you will get questioned on it, by executives. You will get questioned on it by other people in departments and business units that you work with, or even partners that you work with, and so you need to have that, constantly be educating yourself. And then the other piece that you're talking about, you know, typically, companies, CISOs, CTOs, CIOs, they'll reach out to some, some organization that they're paying money to, and they'll bring these professionals in and say, hey, give us the latest on, on this technology like Gen AI, and what security teams are doing with Gen AI, because they need to be able to brief it to the board. Um, but I find, a lot of times myself as an executive, I want to know what my peers are doing, and you've got to be active in the community. And I've got multiple Slack channels that I jump on where I have access to probably 200 or 300 other CISOs internationally, if not more. And I will ask, hey, what's so and so doing with this problem? Or, hey, what do you guys think about this vendor? Or, hey, we're thinking about making some changes in the stack, and we're 100% SaaS, and we want to go ahead and incorporate more AI. What are you guys doing this for threat intel? And we'll have, other peers will jump in. And it's really interesting to see what people are doing. You know, I constantly talk about that cyber is a team sport, that we cannot, you as an executive, as a CISO, cannot function by yourself. You have to have other people to talk to. Even within your organization, you should be talking to the CIO and the CTO, because the security stack isn't by itself. It's intertwined with the IT side, and it's intertwined with, SaaS and and other tools that, the finance team may be using or marketing may be using. And so you have to talk, to your peers within the business. You have to talk to partners. You've got to talk to your peers within your own community, and all of this comes back and helps change your narrative, helps change, that story that, that you're putting together, and you tailor it more towards the business. And especially if you're talking to peers on the outside and you're seeing what other people are doing, when you get asked on the board, hey, okay, this looks good. Okay, I understand where you're going, but what are other people doing? And I love when they ask that, because then I can say, well, I'm glad you asked. I talked to this CISO from this bank and they're doing this. I talked to this CISO from this manufacturing company and they're doing this. You can give examples, and a lot of it is just context. The board isn't looking to beat you up, but the board wants more knowledge so that they can help make decisions, in funding or decisions in, okay, we're going to pivot and operations are going to change, which means I need to change my security program to go with that, and so yeah, it is a, I like to go and say, this, it is a team sport, and CISOs aren't in this by yourself. You have to go ahead and have a community to be able to talk to, both within the business and the business units and the people that you work with internally, and then also externally within our community. Just because you're going to want some peers that have gone before you, or have done things similar to you. It's just smart to be able to, hurry it up. You can ask ChatGPT and say, hey, what should I do? And ChatGPT will tell you something, but it's always good to be able to have a couple of peers to say, that's about half right. here's some things that we've learned, some lessons learned from the last time we did this. You might want to make a couple of changes here.
So, meaning those communities, they don't just happen. You need to invest ahead of time.
Yep.
How do you spend your time between strategy, process, and operations?
It's the thing about it is operations is I have a very good team. I have very good deputies. Um, and that's one of the first things. It's kind of funny. I mean, when I get up in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, I'm grabbing my first cup of coffee, and I'm already logging in and looking at Jira tickets and just kind of seeing how the day's going. And my deputies are already talking to me on Slack saying, okay, hey, this is what's happened the night before. And they've already had a stand up, with the team leads, and and they already know from an operations standpoint what's going on during the day, and they'll highlight to me things that I need to know before I've even left for work. I'm already thinking, okay, they're working on this. We've got this maintenance going on. We've already cleared these tickets, and I'm looking for things that I need to go ahead and talk to the CTO on. Once we're in the office. Um, so from an operations standpoint, I'm always thinking operations. And once so even in the morning, as soon as I wake up, boom, I'm into that operations mode. Once it's a steady flow, I know what I'm going. Is there anything I need to report on? Then I start looking strategically. I'm looking at, okay, the projects that we're working on, what partners I'm working with today. I'm looking at long-term wise reporting and things that we need to do. I'm already looking at resources, projects that we're going to be setting up, startups that we're going to be talking to, things we're going to POC. Um, I'm already looking at, talking with my peer on the IT side. Him and I spend a lot of time because our teams work so close together. Um, we tend to have discussions at least twice a week where we're getting together and coordinating resources. Where his team may spin up an asset for us, a server for us, and then turn it over to us, and then we proceed to configure, and we're installing something for our SIM, or we're doing some configurations for a Gen AI tool that we want to play with, and take a look at and see if it's something that we want to put in our stack. Um, and so, I'm always in an operation mindset, to make sure I have stability. I'm talking with my, with my team. Periodically, I may even jump into some of the tools and just look at things. Um, but, for the most part, usually within the first couple hours in the morning, I roll out of, operations, and then I'm pretty much in strategy the rest of the day. Just
So you're
because of the
saying
fact,
start a morning operation, catch up with what you knew yesterday, see there's nothing off there, make sure that the process is monitored, and then try to move as much upwards towards strategy as much possible.
yeah, and it's just because as the day goes on, you're dealing with other departments. You're dealing with peers and other teams and projects that are going on. You're dealing with, like for me, I'm dealing with the office in Tokyo, or I'm dealing with, I do physical security as well, so I may be talking with, offices over in Abu Dhabi or in Singapore or wherever, and there's various projects that are going on. So yeah, for me, I'm always starting out with operations, because that's business as usual. That's the core, bread and butter of running a security team. But then I spend a large portion of my day in strategy because I'm dealing with people that aren't technically savvy, but they rely on services from my team, or we help guide them with projects and stuff that they're doing. I spend time with legal as we're looking at contracts. I spend time with compliance and with the AI committee because we're looking at new AI tools, and we're making discussions about what we're willing to, use in our portfolio. Or I might deal with the deals team because they want me to go ahead and help do due diligence on a possible new investment. So all of that is strategy. And a core part of my day is that.
Amazing. Okay, so you have a background from the Navy. How does that help you on a day-to-day basis? Besides discipline, as
Yeah,
6:30, everything begins.
yeah. Well, 6:30 is a good day. Bad days, I'm getting woken up at 2 a.m. and having to run downstairs and hop on a Slack. As I'm putting on some sweats and everything and a hoodie and just trying to be quiet so I don't wake up my wife. Um, the Honestly, I think the Navy, I think the military in general, not just the discipline piece, but just the time management and the focus of managing my teams and managing expectations of dealing with executives. Because even in the military, you deal with executives, and you've got life and death decisions that are being made and stuff. And, the, and so I think a lot of it is just the focus of time management, the focus of, the systems thinking of systemic risk, how risk can be broken into pieces that are stitched together. You need to understand these pieces and understand if one falls, they all fall, and which is more systemic risk that you see in businesses today with the way technologies are connected together. When you integrate, things to make things run better, you also deal with the risks of integrating these things as well. The military helped me see a lot of that and helped me prioritize, especially in the middle of an incident and stuff like that, helped me prioritize very, very quickly on what I need to focus on, what I need to break down, what I need to report out, and move forward, until, we fight the fight and complete, the incident or whatever the issue is that we're troubleshooting. And I spend a lot of time with my teams training them on that. Don't get lost in the huge picture. Stay focused on what's in front of you.
So that's actually my last question for today, which is there's always the question of there's too much noise. I need to focus on what is impactful for us. What would be your 1, 2, 3 guide to this is how I'm doing it? This is keep this focus right now.
Yeah. Um, it is interesting because I spend a lot of time with my teams where we do syncs, which are basically stand-ups, at least twice a week, where I go and I do a stand-up with them. We're discussing, what we have going on during the week, any blockers, or any issues that we're having, and it gives me a chance to really you kind of sync up with the teams and the team leads, and find out how our projects are going and what's important with them. And then on a quarterly basis, we'll brief out, strategically, what we are doing from our strategic plan, and where we are at. Are we behind? What's coming up, in the next 6 months, and we're already, planning for that. And then annually, I do a briefing of where we are as a security team to the whole department, and so my team, gets the bigger enterprise view of what's going on, and then we get the smaller, more focused strategic view of where we're at, and then we have the weekly view of what we're currently working on. And then periodically, for all my team leads and my direct reports, I do one-on-ones with them, and typically we'll do a one-on-one bi-weekly, at least like twice a month, where I'll spend time with them, and it's their time. And a lot of times it's career focused of where they're going at in their career or issues they're currently having with their team or a project. And then sometimes, we'll take that one-on-one just to give them more of an enterprise view of everything that's going on around them. I want them to stay focused on what's in front of them, but I also want them to have an awareness of what's going on, because it helps them understand impact, and it helps them understand where we're going as a team and why sometimes I might need to shift.
So if I'm summarizing, your strategy is start early, work on the operations, make sure that you've got a process to focus everybody on what's important, build the strategy, build a network, be able to communicate upwards, the digest of what's important, where the references, why you got this knowledge, and basically make sure that you constantly streamline everything towards how do you help the business with the bigger story instead of
Yeah.
just focusing inwards on technology and products and downwards.
Well, and yeah, I mean, because it's one of the biggest things I say is that, part of the CISOs, honestly, part of the hardest part of our job is managing expectations. Is managing the human element of the job. The technical piece is, to me, is easy. It's the human piece that gets really interesting.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing with the accumulated wisdom over five different CISO positions. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on another episode of CyberOXtales. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your peers. Visit us at ox.security/podcast to access all episodes and exclusive content or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.